This past month was a big month for movies, particularly for a little thing. I don't know if you heard about it, but it's called Barbenheimer. Barbie, Oppenheimer. It was huge. One of the biggest box office successes ever in cinematic history. Like, you look at the second weekend drops, and those are like record breaking historical drops with how low they were, which is insane. These movies are making so much money. Barbie is on its way to $1 billion, and it's crazy. I mean, who would have thought that something that started off as a revenge plan against Christopher Nolan, that's why they moved Barbie to the same release date as Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. And they're like, take that. But then it ended up helping Oppenheimer in the long run anyway. It's kind of crazy, but awesome at the same time. So these two movies, of course, came out on the same day, July 21st, that historic date that will go down in history. I have not seen Oppenheimer yet, unfortunately. I do want to see it. I do plan on seeing it at some point. I just haven't had the opportunity to check it out yet. But a little sneak peek, Barbie is somewhere in this video. Because of course, as always, the month has come to a close. It is now officially August 2023, but we're taking a look back at July and looking at every movie and TV series that I watched in July of 2023. And of course, you can let me know in the comments below what you watched this past month as well. So kicking off with the series I watched, first of all being Secret Invasion, which kicked off in June and ended off its run just a week ago, actually, in July. And this was a pretty disappointing show because Secret Invasion in the comics is one of the most iconic Marvel Comics storylines. And, I always thought it should probably be an Avengers movie and not a series, but when they announced it a series, I was like, okay, this could be interesting, this could be kind of cool, but it wasn't really. It was very disappointing, because it's completely different from what it is in the comics, which, I mean, that's all right, I guess. But even what they were setting up here didn't really feel satisfying or really come to fruition. Like, the big selling point of this series was, it's going to be all about spy espionage and paranoia and all this stuff. But the paranoia thing wasn't really even a big element of it. So it was weird. The finale was okay. On my other channel, The Marvel Life, usually I would do weekly episode reviews and breakdowns of every episode of these MCU Disney Plus shows. This series, I only did the first and the last episode because I didn't care enough to do the other episodes. It was an alright show, but definitely nothing special. Definitely on the lower tier of the MCU Disney Plus series. Then we have a show that just started up, was My Adventures with Superman, a brand new animated series from DC, which is airing on Adult Swim. New episodes every Thursday at midnight, which I think is an absolutely ridiculous time to release these episodes, but whatever. So I did watch this when it first came out. I did a review on my other channel, The DC Life, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. I think it's great to finally be having a Superman animated series once again. I love the original Superman animated series, and this is a great take on the character. It really highlights the core aspects of Superman, as well as I also like that it puts the focus and the spotlight on Lois and Jimmy Olsen as well. I think that's really important. Also, not falling into the trap of just having Lex Luthor and Brainiac and like all these big villains in there. They have some smaller villains like Livewire and Parasite, and for some reason some other DC Comics villains like Heatwave and Captain Cold and Deathstroke. I don't know exactly why, but it's kind of cool at the same time. So we got 5 episodes out now, I believe. I've watched all 5 of them. Now, this is a show that I really enjoyed at first, but again, I'm not going to be staying up to midnight to watch these episodes. I'll watch them at a later date. Like, actually, episode 4 and 5, I actually just finished watching yesterday, because that was just when I got around to it. So it's a show that I don't like really get hyped up for every week, but like when it's there, I'm like, okay, I'll sit down, I'll watch it. It's kind of fun. It's definitely meant for kids, but I like it. It's pretty cool. Speaking of another show that just started up, we have Harley Quinn Season 4 on Max. My God, I love the show. It is so good. And this I will actually be doing weekly episode reviews and breakdowns for on the DC Life because this show is great. The first 2 seasons amazing. Season 3, it went down a little bit. I still enjoyed it for the most part, but season 4 is back up to peak Harley Quinn, at least so far. We got a 3-episode premiere last Thursday. Again, I did do a breakdown on those 3 episodes. And this show is just, it's perfect because it's like, if you're a DC Comics fan, this is great for you because it takes the characters of Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy and just so accurately depicts them and the relationship. And this show is very adult, but it's very funny, very violent. It's like everything you want from an adult animated show, but like having all these DC references and DC characters involved here is just so much fun, and that's something I really, really love about the show. Now moving on to movies. So the first movie I watched this month was St. Elmo's Fire. So as always, most of the movies that I talk about in these videos are things that I'm watching for the first time. So St. Elmo's Fire I'd never seen before. I'm a huge fan of the 80s and 80s movies. So it was one I'd heard about but I hadn't seen yet. So I finally actually ended up watching it, and I really loved this movie. I really, really enjoyed it. It was really good. It's different from a lot of other 80s movies because, most of the 80s movies are like, high school teen dramas, but I like that this is like right after they get out of college, and is also kind of resonating with me specifically because I just got out of high school, so I'm going into the college thing, and, it's a lot about like after school, what happens to your friend group? Like, do you stay together? Do you break up? What happens with those relationships and those dynamics? And that's kind of what's happened to me right now. Like, I just graduated high school, and now, like, a lot of my friend group, like, I may never see again. So this was a great movie and really resonated with me specifically. The Spectacular Now is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's on my list of favorite movies. And actually, speaking of that, if you guys want to see me do a video breaking down my favorite movies of all time, my favorite series of all time, let me know in the comments below. But The Spectacular Now is definitely on that list. I watched it for the first time last year, I believe. And so I rewatched it here, and it's still just as amazing as the first time. Miles Teller is one of my favorite actors. Shailene Woodley is amazing here. All the performances in this film are great. I love a good love story, but I love the realism of this, and it's just so good. Like, I can't even describe how much I love this movie. It's a great coming-of-age film. Definitely one of my favorites, and again, one of my favorite movies of all time. Hamilton. I finally watched Hamilton. You would think that me as like a theater guy and as an actor and like a musical theater nerd, like I would have seen Hamilton by now, but no. So yeah, I finally watched it on Disney Plus. I mean, I've had Disney Plus this whole time. I could have watched it, but I just never got around to watching it. But I finally watched it now. I was actually house sitting for my drama teacher, so I figured, what better time to watch Hamilton than in her house. But it was great. It definitely lived up to the expectations. Earlier this year was actually the beginning of this last school year, my senior year. It was like November. In one of my classes, we actually read Hamilton. Like, we read the script and we listened to the music and everything. And so that was really cool because I got that kind of inside perspective, and I got all the knowledge of the story before I actually watched it. And I think that was actually really helpful. But seeing it was even cooler because then you actually get to see it in action. You get to see the action performances. Everybody was great here. So I really loved Hamilton. Babylon, another first-time watch for me. This, of course, came out last December, and it was kind of at first, before it came out, people were thinking like it was going to be an awards contender, maybe Oscar contender here, but then it came out, bombed at the box office. A lot of people did not like it, and it went nowhere. I mean, I think it got nominated for like costumes and stuff like that, but I actually like this movie. I really enjoyed the story it was telling about this particular time in Hollywood. Damien Chazelle is one of my favorite directors, so I always love his films, and I do really enjoy this one. I think the cast is great, although I will admit it's definitely not my favorite Damien Chazelle film. Like, I definitely prefer La La Land and Whiplash and like a bunch of other ones. But I still enjoy this. It's definitely way too long, 3 hours. Like, I can watch a 3-hour movie, but this feels like especially towards the end, there was a lot that didn't really need to be in there. Like when Tobey Maguire showed up, Tobey Maguire was one of the things I was most looking forward to in this film, but he's barely in the movie. And I feel like when he shows up, that's when the movie gets weird and just falls apart. Like really, I don't even understand why Tobey Maguire was in this. Like his whole role and that whole section of the film didn't really make any sense or really didn't even need to be there, but it was. Um, but I appreciated the ending, the final scene. I really enjoyed that. Um, yeah, it's not the greatest, but I did enjoy it for the most part. Pretty in Pink. Again, another classic 80s film that I had not seen before that I finally got around to checking out. I will admit that I don't really love this one. I mean, it was okay, but I definitely prefer many other John Hughes films starring Molly Ringwald, particularly 16 Candles. But uh, I mean, there were parts of this I liked. I just like being immersed in the whole 80s era and that whole vibe. Ducky was great, um, but again, didn't really love it. And then I watched for the first time The Perks of Being a Wallflower. This is a beautiful film. I think another one I added to my list of favorite movies. This was great. Very extremely relatable. Again, as I always say, I love coming of age stories. I love high school teen dramas, and this is like the perfect example of one. Um, it was great. I just really enjoyed it. Teen Beach Movie. This I've seen many, many times before, but this year is the 10th anniversary. 10 years ago, Teen Beach Movie came out on Disney Channel, which is absolutely insane. This was like my favorite movie as a child. This and Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed were like my favorite movies as a kid. And so I watched it like every year, like multiple times every year. I love this movie so much. And surprisingly, it still holds up. I mean, now that I'm older, there's things about it that I find really cheesy and kind of like, oh, that's very Disney Channel. But I still liked it. I still really enjoyed it. I still remember the music. I still remember some of the dances. So that was fun. Yeah, it's just a classic. Speaking of classics, going back to Damien Chazelle, I did rewatch La La Land. I just watched this movie for the first time back in, I think, April. But I was just in the mood. I was in a very romantic love kind of mood after recently getting my heart broken. I was like, you know what? I want to watch La La Land again. So I did, and this movie is beautiful. Again, another one of my favorite movies of all time. I love La La Land. It's such a great movie. Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. Ryan Gosling is one of the main reasons I also watched this because the next day I was going to watch Barbie. And so I was like, oh, get me in the Ryan Gosling mood. The music in this is great. It's just such an amazing story. I love La La Land. Then the next day I did watch They Cloned Tyrone. That was the day it came out on Netflix. I'd heard some great things about it. I know a lot of people are saying this is like one of the favorite movies of the year. Personally, I didn't really care for it. I found myself actually kind of bored throughout most of the film, and it ended up spending most of it on my phone. There's that. I did also rewatch Catch Me If You Can, which again, if you've been watching these videos, I watched it the first time. I think in February. It was like either February or March. Because I'm in a production of Catch Me If You Can right now. And we're in Up Week at the moment actually. So our performances are this weekend. To kind of prep for that, again, get in the whole mood, set the tone of Catch Me If You Can. I rewatched this movie and it's a great movie. I do think I prefer the musical. But the movie is great. Obviously, great cast. Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hanks. The list goes on. Christopher Walken, Amy Adams. Like, great cast. And great story. If you don't know the story, it's based on a true story. It's crazy the things that this guy did and got away with, and then like how it ends is like kind of awesome. But yeah, I love this story. And then finally, I did watch Barbie. I went to the theater. I watched Barbie, and it was great. You may know I did my review on the channel I will say that I was disappointed in it in a few elements, just because I was really hyped up for this film. Everybody was saying it's like the best movie of the year, one of the best movies ever. So I had my expectations set a little high. Again, as I mentioned in my review, I'm not the target audience. This is an empowering film for women, and I appreciate that. But my biggest takeaway from this film is that I am Ken and I am Kenough. Okay, that's what I've realized. And I watched American Wedding for the first time. I love the first two American Pie movies, but this is my first time continuing the franchise. Of course, as you know, again, if you've been watching these videos, in May, I watched the first American Pie movie because, it was the night before prom, and I was like, oh, this movie is all about losing your virginity at prom. Let's watch this movie. And then in June, I watched American Pie 2, rewatched that film. And now in July, I watched for the first time American Wedding. And I was kind of concerned about this because the first two films I really loved, because that was kind of it was the whole kind of coming of age, high school type movie. This is moving away from that. They're not in high school anymore. They're not in college anymore. They're having a wedding. And it's like more adult world stuff. And you had some of the characters from the first two films that weren't here. But surprisingly, I actually really loved this movie. Honestly, as much as the first two. I really loved it. It's probably even more vulgar and raunchy and inappropriate. But I love Stifler having an even bigger role. That was great. I loved all the wedding stuff. There's just some hilarious moments in this film, and I cannot wait for a couple weeks from now in August to round out this franchise and watch the final film, American Reunion. I'm so excited for that. But guys, finally, not quite finally, last two films, everybody wants some. I watched this movie, as you may know, I think it was in June that I watched Dazed and Confused, which, great movie. I love that. It's a movie that really doesn't have a plot. It's kind of just showing you life as a high schooler in the 70s. And it's great. I loved it. And this is basically the spiritual sequel, like decades later, like 30-ish years later, the director comes back and does the same thing. I think this movie came out in like 2016 or 2017, and he does the same thing, but this time set in the 80s. And so it was very different from Dazed and Confused, but also very similar in other ways. So I really enjoyed this film. I do think I prefer Dazed and Confused, but I really, really loved this one. And now finally, The Social Network. This was another movie I was watching for the first time. Obviously, pretty renowned as a great movie. And I gotta agree, this movie was amazing. I loved getting to see the story behind the creation of Facebook, and how much of a jerk Mark Zuckerberg is. Well, actually, a lot of the people in this movie are kind of a jerk. And the whole time I'm just feeling bad for Eduardo, Andrew Garfield's character. But speaking of that, the cast here is great. Jesse Eisenberg is great as Mark Zuckerberg. Andrew Garfield is great. Even Justin Timberlake is actually giving an amazing performance here. It's a great movie. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't even start watching it until like almost 10 o'clock at night. But, it was worth staying up till midnight to watch this movie. It was really enjoyable. I really, really liked this movie. So that does, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, round out the month of July 2023 for me. All the movies and TV series I watched, and I guess technically didn't watch when it comes to Oppenheimer, but hopefully I will be able to watch that sometime soon. August, we got some cool stuff coming up, like Blue Beetle. I'm really excited for that one. Definitely going to see that in theaters. Things are happening, and this year is going by fast. But guys, of course, as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about everything I watched in July? What did you watch in July? And what do you plan on watching in August 2023? So anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and hit the subscribe button so I can keep you up to date on everything that goes on in the movie life.